Welcome to Reaching Out. I'm Gregory Floyd, President, Local 237 Teamsters. Our very special guest today is Congressman Joseph Crowley from Queens. And part of your district is not in Queens, I believe it's in the Bronx also.
That's right, yeah.
Can you tell us about your district?
Well, it's a great district, Greg. It takes in parts of, I would like to say, north central western Queens. I'm from Woodside, born and raised, and born in the old St. John's Hospital on Queens Boulevard.
I remember that hospital.
Yeah. It's gone now a few years, and it's part of a little bit of an issue in Queens in terms of hospitals. But it takes in, as I said, Woodside, Sunnyside, part of Long Island City, part of all of northern Astoria, just about. Going east, I have East Elmhurst, I have Jackson Heights, I have Corona, a little bit of Flushing, I have College Point, and then I like to say I go overseas, and I have Throgs Neck, Morris Park, Parkchester, Pelham Parkway, Van Ness, City Island, just to name a few of the communities and neighborhoods within the Bronx as well.
Okay. And tell us how you got started in politics.
Yeah, boy, I go back to the third grade when my Uncle Walter Crowley was running for the state assembly. And I remember seeing these green bumper stickers with the Crowley name on it. I said, boy, those are really neat, and I was a little kid. And maybe, that was where the bug was initiated, I guess, as a little guy. All throughout my life, I've cared about particularly foreign affairs, the situation in Northern Ireland. My mother's an immigrant, so I was always active and involved in that issue. And my Uncle Walter ran for the seat that I now hold back in 1984 when
Really?
Geraldine Ferraro ran for vice president. And ultimately, he lost that election to Tom Manton, my predecessor. And then in 1986, there was a vacancy, my uncle passed away subsequent to that in 1985. In 1986, there was a vacancy for the New York State Assembly. And, I'd really gotten the bug big time in 82, 84, the years of 1982, 1984, especially with the congressional race. And then in 86, when the opening came, I found myself in a 7-way primary and won the primary, and then served for 12 years in the state assembly, and now I'm in the midst of my 17th year in the House of Representatives.
Oh, that's amazing career. In the House of Representatives, your party title is Vice Chair of the Democratic Caucus, the 5th highest ranking position for Democrats, and you serve on the House Ways and Means Committee. Mm-hmm. Those are major responsibilities.
Yeah, I think so. It's a great honor to serve not only the House Representatives, but to be elected by my colleagues within the House as one of the 5 elected members of the House leadership. Nancy Pelosi being the leader, Steny Hoyer the whip, Jim Clyburn assistant leader, Javier Becerra the chair of the caucus, and I'm vice chair of the caucus at this moment, as well as sitting on the Ways and Means Committee, which we like to think of on the committee as the most important committee in the House. I know other committees have their point of view about that. But when you think of the vastness of the committee and what it entails, tax, all tax reform goes through tariffs, trade, issues of Medicare, Social Security, just to name a few of some of the issues that we really deal in all the time, every day that we're in Washington.
There are no shortage of issues here in New York City: increasing crime, concerns about increasing crime, job creation, and much more. Gun control, which just came up in South Carolina. Yeah. The gun control issue is back, readily available access to guns. Do you see anything ever coming out in Congress about gun control?
I think, first of all, the events in South Carolina are just horrific. Everything that could possibly be thrown into one particular event has here, and in such a horrific way. The notion of being inside of a church for prayer service, and chilling to hear just some of the snippets in terms of what has come out so far, in terms of what this young man was contemplating, but just a wanton desire to kill someone, or in this case, kill more than several people, is just, it's incredible that this is happening in the United States. But what's really incredible is it happens so much more often than anywhere else in the world. We like to pride ourselves as being the greatest country in the world, and yet we have these divisions. We have these little sections or sectors within society that are outliers, but at the same time have access to weapons of destruction. And they pop up from time to time, whether it's Columbine or it's what happened in Aurora in Colorado, or it's what happened in Newton, Connecticut, or what's happened most recently in South Carolina. I think it's a pandemic. I think it is something that needs to be addressed from a health standpoint of view. And my hope is that at some point our nation and health leaders will step forward and say something has to be done to, if this was some kind of a disease, we'd fight it in every way possible. And this is a disease of some kind that's really eating away at the fabric of society. And yet we're not able to put together a national effort to curtail us or to end it. I think the difficulties in Washington make it nearly impossible to get legislation through. And not entirely, but I think, so far it has shown to be resistant to legislation. I think we need to have the assault weapons ban back on the books. I think there are things we can do in terms of mandatory background checks that we can kind of sift through some of these individuals. You're not going to get everyone, but at least make efforts to try to find ways to address this issue. And that is not happening in Washington today, and that's unfortunate.
That's right. And there seems to be an unwillingness to do it, too.
There is incredible resistance. Doing nothing is doing something. It's like by doing nothing, you are doing something. You're allowing this to happen. And, I know that particularly in more of the southern states and more the rural areas, even of New York State, where people want to have access to guns for the purposes of hunting. And, although I'm not a hunter myself, I have relatives who hunt, and I have no issue with that. Especially if it's for you're using what you've taken, but this is not about hunting. If anything, it's about hunting human beings, and that is something the government should in no way, shape, or form tolerate. And yet there is, by a lack of addressing the issue, a tolerance that's going on, and I think the American people have hit their tolerant point. They're no longer tolerant of this. They're asking their legislators and their government to do something about it, and yet there doesn't seem to be any reprisal for any party or for any individual who sits on their hands and does nothing about this, and that needs to change.
We at Local 237 are especially focused on issues involving the New York City Housing Authority and public housing, as our members make up a third of our membership, make up the majority of the workforce in the New York City public housing. Mm-hmm. Where do you see funding in housing? Because we know that the plan that the mayor has is going more toward RAD, which is going toward privatization. In 10 to 15 years, to continue that trend, there will not be any public housing here in New York City.
Mm-hmm. I'm very concerned about that. There are a lot of issues about public housing that I'm concerned about. But one of the bigger issues, I believe, is a lack of investment by the federal government and the continuation of really investment by the federal government in public housing throughout our country. I can look at public housing, and I have a good deal of it in my district, and I can make observations about what I don't like about it. But what I can tell you is what I do like about it is that it's serving as shelter for thousands and thousands of New Yorkers who otherwise would be on the street. If we think we have a homeless problem now, without proper public housing, we would have an incredible homeless problem in this city. And I think much of the federal government takeover or not takeover, but federal public housing needs to be subsidized or at least helped by the federal government. And there's not enough of that going on. Our problem is with this Republican administration in the House and the Senate. I should say not administration, but leadership in the House and the Senate makes it difficult to see forward in getting the amounts of monies we really need to support public housing in a city like New York. I know the mayor has a plan to create an awful lot of affordable housing in the city, and that is laudable. I wish the mayor well on that. I want to be helpful to him in securing that. But at the same time, we need to preserve public housing and affordable housing within public housing as well, and making sure that every person who wants to have access or needs to have access to that is given that opportunity.
Yeah, it reminds me of someone who would drop a $10 bill to pick up a dollar.
Yeah.
Public housing, it seems like it's being sacrificed to develop a few units of public housing. I mean, affordable housing, and we don't want to lose sight of that.
There are a great number of great men and women who have come out of public housing. Although, look, it's not perfect.
No, it's
by
not.
any shape or form. It's not the preference that most of us would have in our lives. But we do know that without it, we'd have tremendous social ills, much greater than we have today. And we have to recognize that it has served a useful purpose and has been helpful to stabilizing families and helping them move forward. I mean, we want to help people and families in public housing who don't necessarily want to be there forever move forward. But a lack of it or reducing the number of it is not going to be helpful in this vein.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this segment of Reaching Out. We have so many more questions left to ask Congressman Joseph Crowley. We're going to have to invite you back.
I'll be happy to come back.
We have
Thanks,
to complete
Greg.
our interview. Thank you for being on Reaching
Thanks,
Out.
Greg. Great to be with you.